A10, repeat, are you in?
Moving it, guys, police!
At 3:14 a.m., winter held Minneapolis in a hard, silent grip, and the cold did not just sit in the air, it seemed to press down on the city like a lid. The streets were empty to the point that the absence of movement felt unnatural, as if the entire place had paused and was listening. In the courthouse's auxiliary wing, the hallways disappeared into darkness, and the building looked like what it was supposed to be at that hour, an official structure asleep after a long day. Yet one detail broke that illusion. One high-floor window remained lit, and the light did not feel normal, because it came from a judge's office, meaning someone inside was still working late. That small rectangle of brightness made the courthouse stop, feeling like a public institution, and start feeling like a sealed room, a closed space holding something that did not want to be seen. Federal vehicles arrived without sirens, without flashing lights, and without the kind of noise that warns a target to run. They appeared almost at the same moment from different directions, as if the city's quiet had been measured and used as cover. They stopped cleanly and precisely, like a set of moves practiced again and again until every driver knew where to place the bumper and every door opened at the right time. Doors swung open in near silence. Agents stepped out quickly, and their breath rose in pale clouds in the freezing air. Within a short span of seconds, the corridor was no longer a hallway, it was a controlled lane, secured from end to end. A reinforced door was forced, and the entry team flowed into the office with a decisive rhythm that left no room for hesitation, because operations like this cannot afford a pause. If the team is slow by even one beat, a phone call can be made, a device can be wiped, a compartment can be shut, and the evidence that matters most can vanish before anyone reaches it. The first shock was not the breach itself, because raids happen in many places. The first shock was the location. This was not a warehouse full of tape and crates. It was not a yard behind a business. It was not a small apartment linked to street dealers. This was the office of a man who sat on the bench, a man whose daily decisions could shape lives, shorten sentences, end cases, and determine who walked free and who did not. In that instant, the raid stopped looking like an ordinary drug investigation and began to feel like a test of the system itself. Because a courthouse is supposed to be where the law is applied, not where criminal goods are hidden. Then the second shock arrived, and it came from the floor. Beneath a heavy conference table, agents noticed fresh scratches, marks that looked recent, the kind of damage that should not exist in a room maintained with care. It was the type of detail that only matters when people are already searching with suspicion, because scratches on a floor can seem like nothing until you realize they are new, and they are placed in a way that suggests something has been moved repeatedly. When they checked more closely, the surface gave an odd sound, not the flat response of solid flooring, but a hollow hint, as if there was a space underneath. A panel shifted. A hidden steel compartment was exposed and forced open. Inside, there were 34 bricks of cocaine, neatly packaged, stacked with professional precision, and prepared in a way that did not fit the idea of a sudden mistake. That packaging was its own message. It suggested planning, discipline, and a supply chain that knew exactly what it was doing. At that moment, the room changed meaning. The furniture, the papers, the quiet professionalism of the space, all of it became part of a different story. When drugs are discovered inside a courtroom, the point is not only that contraband exists, but that the hiding place was never the street. It was the machinery. It was the inside of the institution. That is why hiding drugs in a courthouse is far more dangerous than hiding them outside on the street. A warehouse or a stash house causes immediate damage, and when it is found, the harm is at least visible. But a courtroom compromised from the inside can do something much slower and more corrosive. It can quietly redirect outcomes, distort investigations, weaken prosecutions, and protect a network over time. and it can do all of that without firing a single shot. In local news segments and official public records, this Somali-born judge had often been described in a way that fit a familiar American success narrative. He appeared as someone who rose through the system, from immigrant life into public service, and he was shown at community events where he spoke about justice, integration, and legal responsibility. His public image was careful, quiet, and respectable. Within the court system, he was not known as a loud figure or a person who sought attention. Instead, he was viewed as someone who worked efficiently and kept things orderly, someone who did not attract controversy. And that is exactly why few people thought to question what happened behind his courtroom door. Silence can feel like stability, and stability often reduces suspicion. That calm, however, became the very thing that drew federal attention. From the U.S. perspective, the investigation did not begin with a dramatic accusation or a media scandal that forced action. It began the way many modern federal cases begin, with numbers, spreadsheets, and patterns that only appear when separate agencies compare what they see. ICE, the FBI, the DEA, and financial analysis teams began observing a repeated model: money arriving fast, being broken into smaller pieces, redirected through multiple channels, and then disappearing. The pattern was not emotional and not obvious to the public, but to analysts it suggested design. Investigators did not move quickly, because in cases like this, acting too early can mean arresting minor players and losing the chance to expose the architecture behind them. After months of assembling fragments, the numbers began to form a clearer outline. Hundreds of millions of dollars moved through organizations labeled as charitable, community-based, or religious, groups connected directly or indirectly to the judge's name. Many of these organizations seemed to exist for short periods, long enough to receive funds, distribute them into other accounts, and then close, only to reappear later under a new name and a slightly different structure. On paper, everything looked legal. The filings were present, the explanations used humanitarian language, the procedures were correct. And if anyone looked at only one piece in isolation, it did not look like a crime. The danger was in the full picture, not the individual parts. The tension escalated when financial timelines were compared with court records. Over years, serious drug cases kept being assigned into the same courtroom space, and the outcomes, taken as a sequence, began to feel repetitive in a way that raised questions. Charges were reduced. Evidence was excluded due to procedural technicalities. Witnesses withdrew. Cases fell apart at exactly the wrong moment for prosecutors. Each decision could still be defended within legal limits, and none of it looked like open law breaking. Yet the total pattern suggested a consistent directional pressure, as if someone were quietly steering the wheel while keeping their hands out of sight. At that stage, the pre-dawn raid no longer looked like a standard narcotics operation. It became a moment that unlocked a deeper suspicion. The cocaine did not stand alone. It pointed toward a sophisticated laundering structure hidden behind community fronts and protected by institutional access. And what investigators feared most was not only the amount of money or the scale of contraband, but the time factor, the possibility that this system had been operating for a long period without detection, shaping outcomes while appearing normal. As the search widened, the office began to reveal a story that contradicted its official appearance. The cocaine was not the end. It was only the first layer. Agents located a satellite phone stored separately, devices built for distance and privacy, not everyday use. They found encrypted communication equipment, not tied to standard public networks, tools designed to keep messages outside normal monitoring systems. They discovered sealed gold bars, and they uncovered international banking documents tied to multiple regions, suggesting movement far beyond a local operation. They also found shipping paperwork labeled humanitarian goods, printed and stamped in a way that looked professional, organized, and legitimate at first glance. Those humanitarian labels mattered because they function as a shield in modern smuggling. Aid is associated with urgency, moral pressure, and social trust, and that combination can reduce scrutiny. When cargo is marked as relief, inspection can become politically sensitive, because few officials want to be the person who delays something claimed to be life-saving. Clearance times can shrink, and the entire system can become easier to exploit. This was not crude hiding. It was calculated use of society's own values as cover, turning trust into a protective layer for illegal movement. From that moment, investigators shifted focus away from only collecting objects and toward building alignment across time. They began matching when humanitarian shipments moved, when large drug cases were delayed, and when supposedly surprise inspections were quietly rescheduled. One point alone could be coincidence. A series of points that line up is something else. Slowly, the fragments began to connect in a way that felt too precise to ignore. The deeper they looked, the more they saw a rhythm that suggested warning systems. Some shipments changed direction only hours before surveillance pressure increased, as if someone had knowledge of when eyes would be watching. Some transit warehouses were cleared just before a planned search, as if a quiet signal had been passed. These were not random moves. They looked like controlled reflexes, like a network that knew exactly when to bend away and when to continue forward. Pressure rose further when the team identified what these perfectly timed shifts had in common. Many of them aligned with sensitive points in federal operations and court schedules, the kind of internal timing that is difficult to know unless someone has access on both sides. That boundary is not easy to reach, because it requires awareness of law enforcement planning, as well as knowledge of judicial processes and procedural weak spots. At this stage, the case stopped resembling a typical smuggling route and started resembling an information-driven system. The most valuable asset was not a stash location, but access to calendars, procedures, and encrypted channels. Every delay, every small technical error, every last-minute schedule change, every shipment reroute became part of a chain reaction that looked prepared in advance rather than improvised. And it was here that the central question formed in investigators' minds. If a person or group could know federal enforcement timing and also understand court schedules and procedural vulnerabilities, then what element of surprise remained? In an environment where information travels ahead of action, could any pursuit still stay ahead? Or would every attempt risk being neutralized before it truly started? Just when the search seemed to have reached its edge, a small irregularity shifted everything. Behind a file shelf, a wooden panel did not align perfectly. The gap was subtle, but field agents notice subtle things, because subtle things often hide the biggest truths. When they removed it, they found a deeper steel compartment, reinforced and concealed more carefully than the space holding the cocaine. Inside was a rugged laptop with no logo and no serial number, built to withstand damage and avoid traceability. And what immediately changed the temperature of the scene was one detail. The device was still warm, as if it had been used recently, close enough in time that the heat had not yet faded. That warmth changed priorities instantly, because in major cases, the most important information is rarely stored on ordinary office machines. It is separated, disconnected from public networks, kept away from personal identifiers, and turned on only when needed. This is simple operational security, but it is effective because it keeps planning outside routine monitoring. When technical specialists arrived and the screen finally came to life, it did not display old finished files or routine work. It showed an active plan. Documents were arranged with structure. Timelines were clear. Diagrams were present. Financial allocations and individual roles were mapped out with practical precision. Cash flow notes were broken into stages, spread across multiple channels, and synchronized to specific windows, suggesting serious preparation rather than fantasy. The twist came from the objective. The materials described a plan to extract a high-value prisoner from a federal prison using a combination of tunneling from below and approach from the water. There was no dramatic language. There were no emotional words, just cold, functional details that made the room go quiet. Because the plan did not target a rival gang or a street corner, it targeted the federal detention system itself. The technical approach was laid out in a practical style. Underwater depth maps identified access zones with lower detection risk. Tidal charts highlighted brief windows when currents weakened. Geological notes suggested drilling angles to reduce vibration and avoid triggering sensors. Everything converged on a narrow time window, only minutes long, the gap before alarms and sensors would activate and make the operation impossible. To investigators, this level of detail carried a direct message. This was not impulsive. It looked like a military-style operation, designed with contingencies, risk management, and backup paths. Every step had alternatives. Every margin of error had been considered, and it depended on one dangerous assumption, that no one inside the system would stop it at the decisive moment. When the laptop's content was placed alongside the earlier findings, the full shape became more alarming. A judge with institutional access, a financial network large enough to fund long preparations, and now a prison break plan engineered to the point that timing could decide everything. The question became less about whether it could happen and more about how long it had been built and how many doors inside the system had already been silently opened in advance. Once the laptop's contents were confirmed, the case shifted upward in urgency. From the U.S. perspective, this stopped being a long procedural investigation and became an immediate threat scenario. Federal command centers activated rapid coordination, connecting land teams, aviation assets, and underwater resources into a single, synchronized response. The objective was not symbolic. It was practical and absolute. Prevent the plan from advancing even one step. At this point, the priority was not to arrest as many people as possible. The priority was to intercept the correct point, because complex escape scenarios become uncontrollable once adversaries reach the breach zone. If alarms activate late and in a reactive posture, response slows, danger rises, and consequences can grow far beyond a normal criminal case. The only workable approach was to block early and block from a distance, before the plan crossed the point where it could not be reversed. Inside coordination rooms, the atmosphere thickened. Screens filled with layered feeds, analysts marked unusual underwater tracks, moving close to the bottom, slow and steady, following paths that did not match civilian vessels or marine life. The movement looked deliberate. Metal shapes slid through current in ways that suggested a platform engineered to stay stable and quiet, not something drifting randomly. Time began to feel compressed. Every minute reduced options. Federal units established restricted zones, adjusted surrounding activity to limit interference, and managed noise to avoid alerting the opposing side. The tidal windows were monitored with intense focus because those short intervals were the key the plan depended on, the moment when the environment itself would help the operation move. Then, another discovery sharpened the seriousness further. Near the prison area, teams found signs of recent drilling and tunneling, hidden under structures that appeared harmless. Equipment was still warm. The tunnel angle looked calculated to reduce vibration and evade sensor detection. This was not early planning. It looked like a late phase already underway. To investigators, that meant commitment. A tunnel and underwater approach do not happen without money, specialized tools, skilled technicians, and accurate intelligence about prison security. If the plan had reached the point of being nearly operational, then who financed it? Who supplied the hardware and expertise? And most importantly, who ensured that the necessary doors stayed quietly open while no one spoke up? While underwater units held position and secured the timing windows, another signal appeared. Not far from the prison area, radar detected a vessel holding a steady position near civilian routes, stable in a way that did not fit normal traffic behavior. It carried no clear identification. It did not broadcast familiar signals. And its deck layout did not match a typical fishing or transport vessel. To analysts, the shape and posture suggested something specific, an extraction platform, a way out. In large operations, entry is only half the story. Exit is the other half, and professional plans never rely on one route alone. They build layers, backups, and secondary escapes. A vessel waiting in the right place implies organization because it accounts for worst-case conditions and still ensures a path for rapid withdrawal before full system response locks everything down. Surveillance imagery strengthened that assessment. Multiple individuals were visible on deck, carrying weapons and placed in overlapping positions, not like a civilian crew, but like security coverage. Encrypted communication equipment was staged. Fuel appeared fully loaded. Medical supplies and first aid bags were arranged neatly, suggesting readiness for injury and rapid movement. Even the timekeeping and communication rhythm aboard seemed synchronized with the plan, as if every action awaited a shared signal. With the risk of the plan entering its final stage, the response decision came quickly. Federal vessels approached in a cutting formation, sealing escape angles and forcing the target to choose between stopping or being isolated. There was no room for prolonged negotiation because delay would allow the rescue phase to begin. Once the vessel was secured, what was found below deck removed the last uncertainty. Maps, gear, schedules, and staged supplies showed this was not a vague backup idea. It was the final operational link in a plan already moving. Designed to connect tunneling, underwater access, and maritime extraction into one chain, at this point, the broader shape became undeniable. This was not just an escape plan, and not just corruption or laundering, but an operation with armed personnel ready to act. And if the final escape link was already waiting in place, then another question followed naturally. How many other branches of this network might still be dormant elsewhere, waiting for a similar signal to wake up? When all pieces are placed together, the final picture becomes clearer than ever. First, a pre-dawn raid revealed something many people struggle to accept. Cocaine hidden inside a judge's office, in a space meant to represent law, procedure, and justice. That single fact can shake confidence by itself because it suggests the system's symbols can be used as cover. Next came the financial material and communication infrastructure. The numbers, encrypted devices, and shipping documentation showed that the laundering was not crude or chaotic. It flowed through the most trusted social structures, through community organizations, charities, and fully legal paperwork. This was not crime built on visible violence. It was crime built on forms, signatures, scheduling, and silence at exactly the right moments. Then the laptop shifted everything into crisis territory. What began as a narcotics and corruption case escalated when a military-style prison break plan appeared. That plan forced federal agencies to operate across multiple layers at once, blocking from a distance, securing underwater access points, and cutting off the maritime escape route before the situation crossed into a point where control would be lost. From a neutral angle but within the U.S. context, the case demonstrates that real strength is not only equipment or force. It is disciplined coordination between agencies, the ability to read data, align timelines, and respond fast enough when minutes can decide outcomes. A delay of one beat can change history not as a metaphor but as a real operational fact. More than that, this is not only the story of one individual exposed, it is a warning about system vulnerabilities, because modern crime does not always need gunfire, threats, or spectacle. It can operate by controlling paperwork, timing, and trust. And when the most trusted elements are exploited, the damage is not measured only in money or seized contraband, but in the slow erosion of social confidence. Now the remaining space belongs to you. Do you see this as simple personal greed, or as a long-term control plan deliberately built over years? Leave a comment so we can discuss it together. And if you want to keep following stories where the most dangerous secrets are not hidden in the darkest places, but embedded inside what seems most trustworthy, subscribe to Military Power. Because the final question still remains open. If a judge could become a transfer point for a sophisticated network like this, then in other cities who might be standing in a similar position, still untouched up to now,